Life for us is a series of joys and dangers, for enemy assassins constantly come to destroy us.
A pair of aliens hiding out on Earth become involved in various adventures. Wow, that sounds like it could be a great idea for a television series in the 1980s. Sounds like. Space Prince Matthew Star has powers in a series called, funnily enough, The Powers of Matthew Star.
Our gold will not be jeopardized. I won't allow it.
If I don't get you out of this, no one else will. Can't you see that?
The Powers of Matthew Star is an early 1980s television series that ran on NBC for one season starting in the fall of 1982. It's the sort of show that we on this channel generally love to discover or rediscover, but before we get too comfy, just know that this is a series that ultimately can best be described with one single word: bland.
Pat, watch me.
It's not god-awful, but it never manages to rise above mediocre. It's a show with an interesting premise that proceeded to use it to do almost nothing of any note, and certainly nothing that hadn't been done to death by many other series.
Look, I think we ought to do what we came here to do.
It's a show that changed a lot along the way, though we'll get to that later in this video. There was also a pilot episode that differed markedly from the full series, which was then later bundled into the series as the final episode without much explanation for the major contradictions.
There's more to it than I thought.
Is this series really over 40 years old? My, how time flies. When you leave your watch behind on a plane. It seems like only yesterday that I saw ads on television for The Powers of Matthew Star when it was shown locally in the summer on a Friday night. And when Friday night rolled around, I was watching something else.
That's okay, Coach, I understand.
The planet Quadris has been overrun and the young heir to the throne has been taken to hide out on Earth and trained by his protector until he's old enough to return to reclaim his throne. On Earth, the prince is teenage Matthew Star, who, along with his guardian Walt Shepherd, has been moving around a lot to avoid interest from government agencies.
And Ehawk has more than proven himself up to the challenge.
Matthew is the heir to the throne of Quadris, where only the royal line have powers. Walt's real name is Dehi, and Matthew's real name is Ehawk, but it's never mentioned whether Ehawk had a brother called Tony.
He's right, Tony.
Matthew and Walt move to a new town where Matthew will attend Crestridge High as a student, and Walt will work as a science teacher. Along the way, Matthew gets serious with rich girl Pam, and alongside the usual sanitized high school storylines, Matthew and Walt will become involved in various adventures involving crooks and spies. Occasionally, very, very occasionally, there will be a storyline that delves into Matthew's background. Delve might be overselling it. At best, we take a cursory glance at Matthew's backstory, which was appropriate since my cousin Molly was often taking a cursory glance at Matthew's backstory.
Please, hurry!
For a show called The Powers of Matthew Star, you would expect any character called Matthew Star to have some sort of powers. If so, you're in luck. For the first half of the series, these powers are generally limited to telepathy, heightened perception, and telekinesis. What's telekinesis? I don't know, but I think I used to have a really bad case of telekinesis until I was prescribed a really strong course of antibiotics. Thankfully, that's all been cleared up, and now I can pee without the pain. Oh, sorry, that telekinesis, or telekinesis, depending on how you want to say it. As in moving objects with your mind, not a UTI. The premise for the series, or at least part of it, was Walt and Matthew hiding out from assassins while the youngster developed his powers. However, the resulting series has hardly any alien assassins, and instead it's a very standard 1980s action-adventure series where every sharp edge has been removed surgically, every single line of dialogue sandpapered, so that the most inoffensive and bland series was the result.
Picture doesn't have any context, any flavor, any subtext. It has nothing. Of course, a good script would have helped.
Matthew Star, played by Peter Barton, a future soap actor, is a typical teenager who wants to customize his old van while making time with Pam.
But I'm just glad that we're here together.
Though their relationship often has to be put on hold if Matthew becomes involved in a mission where he makes a connection with or has to fake interest in another girl.
Stay here, look after the girls!
Good idea. Stay here and look after the girls. Please.
Walt uses his experience to keep Matthew safe while guiding him through the development of his powers and to impress upon the youngster not to abuse his powers for convenience. Unless, of course, you could get a joke out of it, in which case, have at it.
Yes, but using your powers wouldn't be fair, Matthew.
I promise, only to avoid injury.
Louis Gossett Jr. was already a familiar face on television, and by the end of the show's original run, would win an Academy Award for his role in An Officer and a Gentleman.
Well, what do you know about that?
As a side note, powers of Matthew Starr, funnily enough, did not sweep the Emmys that year. I checked. Twice.
Pam couldn't smell it, but I could.
What, the pizza?
Amy Steele played Matthew's steady girlfriend Pamela in the first half of the series, in a role where she's basically set up to be constantly disappointed when competing for his attention.
What makes this boy so special?
In the first episode, Matthew and Walt had been tracked down by Air Force General Tucker, someone who'd been searching for proof of extraterrestrial life for years. He just wants confirmation of his theories rather than have the pair arrested and then studied in a black site morgue. Occasionally, Tucker will ask the pair to carry out a mission for the government.
Does Bob really have a black belt?
Yeah, and I'm from another planet.
The first episode sees Matthew at his new school, where he meets Pamela, and Walt meets General Tucker, while an alien assassin sends a robot to observe Matthew. And then after that, trouble would find them, where Matthew and Walt have to sort something out locally. It could be a gangster who's the spitting image of Walt, or an old friend of Matthew's who wants to be a stuntman, but probably shouldn't be. Matthew and his friends are on a hike when they encounter some escaped prisoners. Matthew has to sweet-talk a nerdy classmate who has invented some exploding paint.
Classic plot.
Matthew tries to help his football rival from the wrong side of the tracks, or help a girl having predictive visions.
What about that?
It has a self-destruct device. I'll take care of it.
All through this, two things are evident. Peter Barton's death stare when he uses his powers, and his perfectly sculpted hairdo that the crooks can't make a dent in.
Take it easy, Matthew.
On occasion, the stories tried to mix things up. One episode saw Walt and Matthew sent on an undercover mission in Italy. Another episode saw Matthew end up in the Bermuda Triangle, where he just happens to meet a pair of Quadrians who had news of the death of Matthew's father. Matthew is proclaimed King of Quadris, but then the next week has to go back to studying for midterms. A strange psychic turns out to be Matthew's mother, who had been thought dead.
Mother?
Ehawk.
However, she's given health issues which precludes her from staying with Matthew and Walt, which was handy because this show could not afford another regular.
You're wrong. There's nothing going on. Shut up!
In a few episodes, Matthew has people lining up against him at school, as is so common in a high school set program. But then, much of the rest of the time, the show's depiction of an American high school is almost idyllic. A lot of the time, no one really hassles Matthew. He has no continuing classroom nemesis who's constantly making moves on Pam behind his back. Matthew Starr isn't bullied in any serious way. Most people seem to like him. He's not seen as a freak, and the school seems a mostly chill place to be a student. Not a single nerd has his head shoved down a toilet, no one sets off cherry bombs in the little boys' room, and no nerd has his head blown off by an exploding cherry bomb while his head was shoved down a toilet.
What is going on?
And then, halfway through the series, things change completely. There's a new title sequence, a new theme tune, and that's just the start. Matthew is still nominally in school and Walt still teaches, but that will rarely be shown or even talked about past the first episode of this second batch of episodes. Matthew and Walt now seem to be on call as government agents using Matthew's powers for various missions. Matt's old pals are gone, as is Amy, and even scenes set in what's supposed to be their old house are kept to a minimum. Without Amy around, Matthew is now free to have random romances throughout the episodes. They each now wear a ring that flashes when they have a new mission. And maybe the show had a budget cut, meaning Louis Gossett Jr. had to make do with a mustache instead of a goatee.
A little longer could have been fatal.
The pair now have a new handler, Major Wymore, who ratchets up the cloak and dagger by briefing the pair in various locations to try and make the show feel less domestic. I guess it's good that Matthew is still apparently in school while supposedly being a teenage secret agent, because I would really hate to think the security of the world depended on a 16-year-old high school dropout. Matthew's powers have advanced in that he can now transmute matter, but his most used ability is astral projection. Basically, Matthew can go to sleep and project a copy of himself, which can travel through solid matter, but there's a time limit where it's very dangerous to go too close to that, and also his sleeping body is vulnerable.
Well, if you keep an eye on my body, I'll keep an eye on Deke.
That's a deal.
Now that the series was no longer anchored around the high school, Matthew and Walt could get more involved in taking down nefarious activities, uncovering espionage rings, conspiracies to steal classified secrets, stop major heists, that sort of thing. I mean, I don't have to really spell out for you the type of story, since if you've watched one of these shows, you really have seen all of them.
I just hate science fiction.
We have a doomed space mission which involves Matthew going undercover dressed as a cowboy. while Walt's undercover as an Air Force officer where he has to learn how to fly a fighter jet. Matthew becomes a magician's assistant. Matthew goes undercover trying to stop the kidnap of a motocross rider.
This isn't as bad as I thought it'd be!
Matthew goes undercover as a wing walker, which is not as kinky as it sounds. Matthew goes undercover at a dating service targeting geniuses where they're being kidnapped.
Why, Simon, you're quite a hunk.
Another episode sees Matthew going undercover as a drag racer. Well, yes, see, the apple does not fall far from the action-adventure tree. If I had $1 for every action-adventure show that recycled the same story ideas and plots over and over, I'd have $72. Honestly, I thought it would be more than that. In the first half of the series, Walt is often trying to keep Matthew out of harm's way, but in the second half, all talk of alien assassins returning to Quadris and keeping Matthew safe seems to have gone out the door with Pam.
I suppose you'd rather spend the rest of your life drifting, sleeping in alleys, and eating garbage, rolling in dirt.
However, with all of these changes, the show was still not a rating smash, and the network cancelled the series after one season of 22 episodes.
In other words, the ending stinks.
The last episode that was broadcast, Star Night, was actually the very first episode to be made. It was the original pilot. It's a weird hybrid of an episode that combines the original opening titles and narration with the updated music of the second half of the series. Louis Gossett Jr. is nowhere to be seen, our hero is back in high school with Pam again, and he now lives with Max, who's not a relative but is the school janitor. The youngster has no idea that he has any powers or is an alien. Then the powers start appearing.
I don't want to be special. I don't want to be different. I want to be like everybody else.
Max seems to have a hobby of working on complex electronic gear, and unbeknownst to anybody, has a metallic claw. Oh, and just to confuse viewers who have been watching this show, he's not Matthew Starr, it's David Starr. During this pilot, David Starr is dealing with the SMDB, or the School Mega Douchebag, whose only redeeming quality is that he has no redeeming qualities. SMDB has it in for Matthew, trying anything to tear him down, including trying to embarrass David in public because his guardian Max is the janitor. The pilot episode seems a little rougher around the edges than the series episodes, but the script has more of an edge and less of the sterile wisecracks of the eventual series.
I'd like you to meet my father.
The pilot is also the only episode of the series where anybody wears one of those white onesies that appear a lot in the publicity photographs for the series. I'm wearing one right now. It's quite comfortable, but not ideal if you are a messy eater who enjoys tomato soup.
It's an old familiar story. It's too familiar.
But after episode 22, that was it. Did we miss anything if we hadn't seen it? Probably not. Did we enjoy it if we did watch it? Well, that's a tough one.
Doesn't matter. It's not the end of the world.
I know.
Powers of Matthew Starr has the hallmarks of being put together by a committee. Writer Stephen E. Souza had contributed to a lot of the action-adventure series that we would feature on this channel, and would later contribute to scripts of major films like Die Hard, and he'd direct the Street Fighter movie. He's credited as the show's creator, meaning he most likely wrote the show's pilot. Then there's a barrage of developed by names, producers Daniel Wilson, Harve Bennett, and others, as well as many more writers and producers.
Not much pop in your popper.
The main takeaway is, though, that there's no single vision as to what the show was meant to be. Just settling on a name for the main character and of course the series took a while. Production had started in 1981 with the idea of the series making its debut on NBC in early 1982. But an accident on set injured both of the series stars, with Barton being badly burnt, and the production was shut down for several months while he recuperated. The series would eventually appear in September of 1982.
No, Shep, no more. I have the powers and I want to fight.
What if you lose?
Early episodes began with a lovely sequence of miniature effects work, part of a space battle, while Louis Gossett Jr. set up the show's premise of exiled aliens. And then the show's theme tune kicked in, which did sound like something you'd hear on a video at a presentation trying to sell you 2 weeks in a beach shack in a Floridian swamp.
It may be underwater for 11 months of the year, but with your help, we can make that 12 months.
Of course, there are no special effects remotely like this in the actual series.
Shep, can you hear me? You're in a trap. The Ranger's a killer.
Matthew's powers are mainly telekinetic in nature. They're often achieved simply with props on wires or simple stunts, and there were occasional uses of optical effects, particularly later on when Matthew would astrally project himself out of his body.
But unconvincing.
After the show's retooling, there'd be yet another theme tune, this one sounding more like it should be called Casio Tone Demo Song. In general, most of Powers of Matthew Starr sounds like a typical early to mid-80s synth score, which, much like the rest of the show, was pretty... what's the word I'm looking for? What's the polar opposite of memorable? Except this second theme tune is now stuck into my head to the point where a critical head injury cannot come soon enough.
No time for subtlety.
The idea of a young person with gifts and an older mentor proved to be a popular theme for action-adventure series in the 70s and 80s, but sometimes they proved a little too similar. Shazam had Mentor and Billy Batson driving around in an RV. Starman, based on the John Carpenter film, covered similar ground to Powers of Matthew Starr, and then there was the more martial arts themed series, The Master, which managed to predate The Karate Kid and the miniseries inspired by that movie. However, most of these shows did not have a particularly long run.
They already sold this turkey to cable. I'm gonna have to make it work.
For some odd reason, lost in time, a couple of episodes were finished on then standard analog videotape, complete with jagged titles.
Videotape is a killer.
While this was quite unusual for a filmed series from 1982, within a few years this would become the standard for most American programs, which would mean making a high-definition version of an older television show much more difficult. Imagine taking a very old passport photo, blowing it up 1,000 times so you could put it in a frame and hang it on the wall. But then imagine it was a really embarrassing passport photo from when you were in a cult.
You have to admit, it doesn't look too good.
I know that doesn't properly explain the difference between standard definition and high definition, but you have to understand, it was a really embarrassing photo.
Let me see that.
Powers of Matthew Starr is unusual for an 80s show in that, despite me generally getting enjoyment from even cheese like Automan or Manimal, Powers of Matthew Starr was not a show that I got into while I was watching it, and there was no tinge of sadness at what might have been. And I am someone who was in the target age group when this series was shown. I'd seen articles in Starlog and thought, yeah, I'll watch that. But by the time the series was actually on television...
Oh, great! I'll see you there.
I made zero effort to watch it. I was a kid, it's not like I had anything better to do at the time.
What is going on around here?
I do remember once popping on an episode, watched a little bit, and then that was it. It just seemed dull, even to me as a child.
I don't know what you're up to, but you just got yourselves off the bus.
And now as an adult, it still seems really dull, bland, by the numbers, low effort, and unoriginal. Much like my attempt to create a daytime soap opera set in the high-stakes world of food trucks. Man, I did not expect that to bomb so hard.
You can cancel us permanently.
Powers of Matthew Starr was a show with an interesting premise, where the problem was in the execution, leaving us with one of the blandest science fiction themed series of the early 80s. Even blander than my show, The Young and the Burger Van.
It's a nice van.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos. His rusty shitbox of a van has a pretty weak engine, which is why the show isn't called The Powers of Matthew's Car.
What is this anyway today? A dump on Matthew's van day?